안녕하세요. 꾸준한 영어 테드쌤입니다. 자, 오늘은 즐거운 추석입니다. 여러가지 바쁘게 살다 보니까 어제부터 연휴가 시작된지도 모르고 제가 이동해야 되는 것도 모르고 낭독 스케줄을 잡아두었다가 당황했습니다. 낭독을 할 수 있는 여건이 어제는 전혀 안 되었거든요. 자, 오늘은 인사들 다 드리고 즐거운 추석 되셨는지 모르겠습니다. 모쪼록 맞이한 긴 연휴에 즐거운 추석 되셨기를 바라고 자, 오늘은 제가 다른 곳에 와서 녹음을 하는 관계로 지금 책 이북만 보고 낭독을 하도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 이북 시작하기 전에 자, 오늘도 새로운 표현 하나 배워볼게요. 스파이더맨에 나오는 스파이더맨 Far From Home 이번 얼마 전에 개봉됐었던 영화죠. 스파이더맨이 이제 디즈니 마블과 이제는 같이 협업을 안 한대요. 원래 이제 소니사에서 저작권이 그러니까 영화를 만들 수 있는 저작권이 있었는데 이거를 디즈니랑 이제 협업을 해서 어벤져스나 이런 데서 이제 스파이더맨이 나왔었는데 이제 소니가 더 이상 디즈니랑 협업을 하지 않겠다라고 선언을 하면서 이제 스파이더맨이 더 이상 이제 마블 쪽과 연결된 얘기는 좀 나오기 힘들 것 같아요. 어쨌든 거의 마지막으로 마블과 작업한 내용이라고 보시면 되고 이 영화에서 친구랑 이제 얘기를 하는 내용이 있죠. 이제 교실에서 나누는 얘기 중에 이제 약간 제가 일부분만 발췌해서 이제 말씀을 드리는 건데 아무 문제 없이 잘 넘긴 것 같아. 이제 지네들끼리 이제 작당 모의를 하다가 이제 이렇게 여자친구가 이제 왔을 때 유야무야 넘기는 내용입니다. 그때 이 대화 중에서 뭐 일정 부분이 있지만 제가 이제 발췌한 부분만 가지고 말씀을 드릴게요. 야, 내가 잘은 몰라도 이것만은 확실히 알아. 그러고 나서 이제 블러블러블러 하고 나서 잘 이제 위기를 모면하죠. 그러면서 이렇게 얘기합니다. 친구야, 아무 문제 없이 잘 넘긴 것 같아. 보통 이제 애들이 이제 이렇게 얘기할 때 I think 이렇게 내 생각에는 이런 거 얘기 많이 하는데 사실은 이건 이제 우리가 말을 할 때는 이렇게 번역을 잘 안 하죠, 그죠? 근데 이제 의미상에서는 이제 자기 의견을 피력을 할 때 보통 I think라고 많이 합니다. 그래서 아무 문제 없이 잘 넘긴 것 같아 라는 표현이 뭘까요? 야, 우리 잘 넘긴 것 같아. 뭔가 쉬울 것 같은데 쉽지 않죠. 자, 요 표현 같이 한번 배워보겠습니다. Hey, I may not know much, but I do know this. Dude, I think that went really great. went라는 표현 하나만으로도 이걸 잘 넘겼다 라는 표현이 되거든요. 재밌지 않습니까? 네, 되게 어려운 다른 표현이 있거나 그런 건 아니에요. That went really great. Dude, I think that went really great. 그죠? 그리고 야, 내가 잘은 몰라도 이것만은 알아. 이거 되게 뭐 어렵게 표현할 것 같은데 이것도 그렇지 않아요. I may not know much. 내가 잘 모르지만 말이야. But I do know this. 이것만은 확실히 알아. I may not know much, but I do know this. Dude, I think that went really great. 제가 생각해도 꽤 괜찮은 표현 같아요. 그죠? 이거 친구들끼리 편안하게 가볍게 얘기 나눌 때 할 수 있는 문제고 또 여러분들도 생활 속에서 쓸 수 있는 충분히 좋은 표현 같아서 발췌해봤습니다. 자, 오늘 새로운 표현을 여기까지 배우도록 하시고요. Bunnicula 제가 한번 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. Bunnicula Chapter 1 The Arrival I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think that's their way of making up for not taking me with them. As if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen, and the people think you are being impolite. If you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public, no thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about the first night. Well, it was cold, the rain was pelting the windows, the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chester was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd staked out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself. I'm picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew that it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open, and there they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle, a bundle with tiny glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad." "Take your boots off. You're soaking wet," replied his mother somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But, Ma, what about? First stop dripping on the carpet. Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him. You will drop him." "I will not. You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me. I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. Take off your coats this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats that she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then, all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just a good boy, Harold, or use the little box, Chester, at our house. Oh no, with us it's, "Hey, Harold, Dad got raised and now we are in a higher tax bracket," or "Come, sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show." Maybe you will see a relative, which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience, already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who was the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them, because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, But I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them, because my family got around a lot. I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a beloved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chapter, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation, because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't. I just dropped it. Pete won't let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little. I'm not. You're too. Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive. But if there's any milk around, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's gonna keep the rabbit in his room." "That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." "Only sometimes," I thought. "But I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer." Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake, and Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing, and the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean." "I found him, and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room, and Chester too, if you want to. But I'm going to keep the rabbit in mine." Smelly Old Harold, I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly, indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room, on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "Peter's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He will be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Monroe through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Pete asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby, "he's not drinking his milk." Chester nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can't that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he had to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Monroe. "What about, say, Bumba?" "Uh-oh, there she goes again," I thought. "Where did she get them?" "Yuck," we all said. "Well, then, how about Fluffy?" She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Murner's ankles and purring loudly. "No, Chester, not now," she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester?" Toby asked, as he scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. "Come on, Harold," Toby called. "You've got to help me with the name, too." I joined the family, and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. "So this is a rabbit," I thought. "He sort of looks like a Chester. Only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail, and a motor in his nose." "Well," said Pete, after a moment, "since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson?" There was a moment of silence. "Who's Mr. Johnson?" asked Toby. "The guy who owns the movie theater," Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. "How about Prince?" said Mr. Monroe. "Dad," said Toby, "are you kidding?" "Well, I had a dog named Prince once," he replied lamely. "Prince, I thought that's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula," Toby said. "That's a stupid name," said Pete. "No, it's not, and anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him." "Mom, you're not gonna let him name him, are you? That's favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do." Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. "Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula," cried Toby. "Please, please, please." And with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, "Let's not have any more argument. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me." "What about me?" muttered Chester. "I won't be happy until she puts down the milk." "Well, guys, is that okay with you?" she asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. "Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right." Pete shrugged. "It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow." "What about Chester?" Toby said, dropping the frantic cat to the floor. "Maybe he would like it." Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. "Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today." She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. "Okay, bedtime," said Mr. Monroe. "Good night, Bunnicula," Toby said. "Good night, Count Bunnicula," Pete said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. "Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester." I licked Toby good night. "Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, Don Chester." I drooled on Peter's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. "Good night, Pete," Mrs. Monroe said with great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, "Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester." Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. "You know better, dear," Mr. Monroe said. "That was very clever, Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that." "Oh, I don't know, Robert." She smiled as she put her arm through his. "I think Prince is a lovely name, too." The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly, he turned to me. "I wish they had named him Fluffy," was all he said. 자, 두 번째 읽기는 이제 음원을 들으면서 섀도우 리딩으로 하되 책을 같이 보면서 읽어보겠습니다. 세 번째에서는 이제 섀도우 리딩만으로 이제 또 한번 읽어보겠습니다. Bunnicula, A Rabbit Tale of Mystery, Chapter 1, The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family, with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them. As if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And the people think that you're being impolite. And if you fall asleep and start to snore, or scratch yourself in public, no thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about the first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind was howling and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chapter was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he staked out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there's nothing that frightens Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Murnows, since it was just about time for the movie to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood in the doorway, Toby and Pete and the mom and dad Murno. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Murno was carrying a little bundle. A bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother. Somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about—" "First stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Murno, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him." "You'll drop him." "I will not." "You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Murno. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats and she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I felt I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with a great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, "Good boy, Harold," or "Use the little box Chester at our house." Oh no, with us it's, "Hey Harold, Dad got a raise and now we're in a higher tax bracket," or "Come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative," which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Murno is a college professor and Mrs. Murno is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household. And we are, therefore, rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Murno told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat, but in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Murno borrowed his flashlight. What they had found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Murno's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Murnos were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy blood lines running through these veins, and the Russian war pond happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a beloved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house for him out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get him some milk and lettuce. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he came to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moved over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't, I just dropped it. Peter won't let me carry it. It's too big, Toby's too little. I'm not, you're two." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive, but if there's any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Ma, Toby says he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." Only sometimes I thought that when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, at one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, doesn't believe in sharing. And the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a cricket in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean?" "I found him and he's sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room and Chester too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine," Pete said. Smelly Old Harold. I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's light there, and he will get lots of fresh air." "Pete's taller than I am," Toby cried. "He'll be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Monroe through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Pete asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chester nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison, "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Floppy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Monroe. "What about, say, Bum Bum?" "Uh-oh, there she goes again," I thought. "Where does she get them?" "Yuck," we all said. "Well then, how about Fluffy?" she offered hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. "No, Chester, not now," she said, pushing him aside. "You want to help us name him, don't you, Chester?" Toby asked as she scooped him up into his arms. Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help with the name too. I joined the family and the serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is a rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like Chester, only he's got longer ears and a shorter tail and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about Prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. If you found him at a Dracula movie, let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name you, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed the kettle a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chettle followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We will compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I won't be happy until she puts down that milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Mom. I think that name is just too right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Cheddar? Toby said, dropping the French cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Cheddar made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Cheddar doesn't want any more milk, do you, Cheddar? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Cheddar on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Cheddar didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically, what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw pellicular movement from his cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Peter's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with a great finality, as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. Bunnicula. I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. 자, 이제 음원만 들으면서 shadow reading 해보도록 하겠습니다. Bunnicula Chapter 1, The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family, with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something always they went to. They went. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and stare at the screen. And people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore. 다시 하도록 하겠습니다. 조금 놓쳤어요. 처음부터 다시 할게요. 자, 다시 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Chapter 1. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired eyes on our visitor. I'd been left home by the family, with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen, and the people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or sketch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows, the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front doors. My friend Chatter was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he staked out as his own. I saw that once again he covered the whole sheet with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there's nothing that frightens Chatter more than vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since we just about time to be movie to be over. After the front door flew open, Toby and Pete, Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle. A bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off your soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But, Mom, what about—" "First, stop dripping on the carpet." Would somebody like to take this? "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found him. You dropped him. I will not. You will too. Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in having the boys out of their coat, she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold, guess what happened to me?" Then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I felt I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, "Good boy, Harold," or "Use the little box Chester" in our house. Oh no, with us it's, "Hey Harold, Dad got a raise and now we are in a higher tax bracket," or "Come sit on the bed, Chester, and watch this wild kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative," which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household, and we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the pit of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed and sat down very quietly so they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had sat on something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. In an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found on the Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that's now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fanciful lines running through these veins, and the Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a beloved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. But the little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Mustard and boys were making a house party out of an old crate with some heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage for the night. The boy making his house in the shoebox. Toby and Peter ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Munoz went to the kitchen to get some milk and lettuce. Mr. Munoz sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he was wondering how he became in his living in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chet, and the two of us casually moseyed over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chatter and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "No, Toby's broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't. I just dropped it. Pete won't let me carry it. It's too big." Toby told her, "I'm not. You are too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Munoz called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here and with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chatter turned to me and said under his breath, "Now that lettuce works the purchase, and if any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't argue with him. "Ma, Toby says he's gonna keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." Only sometimes, I thought, when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared the stash with me. It was, after all, one of the late night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Peter, on the other hand, he doesn't believe in sharing, and the only time I tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I had a crick in my neck for days. "But he's mine," Toby said. "I found him." "You sat on him, you mean?" "I found him and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room and Chatter too if you want to, but I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine," Pete said. Smelly Old Harold. I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Munoz spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here on the table by the window." "Pete, taller than I am," Toby cried. "Who'll be able to see the rabbit better?" "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mr. Munoz through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Peter asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Munoz smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby, "he's not drinking his milk." Chatter nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I kill you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Munoz. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to name him right now." It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Munoz had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Munoz. "Oh, say, Bumba." "Uh-oh, there she goes again," I thought. "Well, does she get them?" "Yuck," we all said. "Well then, how about Fluffy?" she offered hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Muller's ankles, purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, she said, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? Toby asked as he scooped him up into his arms. And Chester shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help with the name him too. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got a longer ears and shorter tail, and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movies, so why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Pete answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mrs. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once. Prince, I thought that's a silly name for a dog. We found him in a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name you, are you? That's a favoritism, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad. Let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed Chester a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl and the milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chester followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chester. I won't be happy until she puts down that milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and then at the rabbit. A smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma. I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed him. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the print cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mr. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester doesn't want the milk. You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically, in what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a particular movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with a great finality as she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. But, Nicola, I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert, she smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in a state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. 자, 오늘 여기까지 제가 3번 낭독하는 것으로 오늘 추석 낭독을 마감하도록 하겠습니다. 앞으로는 조금 더 열심히 해서 빠른 시간 안에 500번 완성해 볼 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 자, 오늘은 여기까지.